The first warning sign wasn't Jeremy's self-satisfied little grin. It was the email that had summoned her to the HR office at 7:58 a.m., devoid of a subject line, and with the word urgent typed in all caps, like a petulant child, masquerading as an executive. Leonora hadn't even managed a second coffee before she arrived to see the young man already occupying her customary seat, as if he held the deed to the very air in the room. The young man, Jeremy Ham, every one of his 28 years of privilege packed into a tailored blazer and an expensive haircut, didn't so much as raise his head when she came in. He just tapped a pen against his teeth, as though he were waiting on a food delivery, not about to dismantle the company's core. "Leonora," he said, drawing out the name as if it were an unpleasant taste. "I appreciate you coming in so early. We'll make this quick." The HR representative was frozen in the corner, like a piece of furniture. No direct gaze. That's when Leonora was certain she didn't require the speech. Naturally, Jeremy delivered it anyway. "After assessing departmental synergies," he started, using a term he'd clearly scraped from some online business guru that morning, "we have determined your position has been identified as redundant. We're optimizing historical expenditures and injecting fresh talent, effective immediately. Your duties have been terminated." He actually beamed, as if he'd just cured a global crisis by firing the very woman who prevented the entire logistics department from imploding into a fiery mess. Leonora didn't even flinch. No pleading, no furious outburst. She simply straightened her blazer, pushed the company-issued laptop across the table, as if she were returning a faulty appliance, and got to her feet. "Optimize this," she whispered, so softly only she could hear, and walked out with a level of dignity he would never possess. "It's remarkable, really. You invest 15 years of your life somewhere, pouring yourself into its very foundations, rectifying its mistakes, and rescuing it during every acquisition scare. Then a young man with a freshly printed business degree and his father's login credentials can delete your career before 9 a.m. And listen, before I go on, if you've ever been kicked in the shins by some Jeremy in your life and managed to keep moving forward, help me reach my first ever goal of 10,000 subscribers. It's amazing what kind of justice we can orchestrate with a compelling story and a bit of solidarity." Back in her office, well, her former office, Leonora collected her box of personal items, pictures of her beagles, a framed quote from her grandmother, "Don't settle scores, settle accounts," and a flash drive secured beneath the drawer, labeled simply Clause 12C. She didn't weep. She didn't curse. She just exited through the same glass door she had entered every morning for a decade and a half. But on this occasion, she didn't use her badge to exit. She paused, gave the receptionist a small smile, and said, "No need to rush deactivating my login." The kid believed he had decapitated a relic. He had no idea he'd just disconnected the main power supply. The box was still warm from the drive home, its contents rattling gently as Leonora placed it on her dining room table, next to a wilting orchid and an unopened bottle of Syrah she had been reserving for a victory. This wasn't the victory she'd envisioned, but it would have to suffice. She didn't reach for the wine. Not yet. Instead, she walked over to a tall, unassuming cabinet in her living room that no one but her had ever accessed. She slid the panel open, entered a 6-digit code that hadn't been altered in 15 years, and waited for the sound of a mechanical release. The drawer inside slid open with a groan, as if it had been sealed for a decade, which was almost accurate. The documents within were immaculate, filed away like historical artifacts. She browsed past old tax forms, a couple of performance reviews from a VP who had wept when he was let go, and a sealed envelope marked Ham Original. Inside lay the contract. When this company was a single poor quarter from insolvency, Leonora had done more than just step in. She had re-engineered half of their operational back-end, coding the automation logic for their freight routing system in her own living room, surviving on lukewarm takeout and fending off creditors. She hadn't demanded a bonus. She had requested something more strategic, and Jeremy's father, Gideon Ham, the actual CEO, not the entitled heir she'd encountered that morning, had been wise enough to grant it. Clause 12C. It didn't appear significant on the page. Just 3 paragraphs nestled between arbitration clauses and standard NDAs. But Leonora knew every word by heart. Intellectual property rights to any bespoke software she developed on her personal hardware. A 5% equity stake if the company surpassed a specific revenue target, which it had done 3 years prior, without any disbursement. And the critical part, all executive reorganization decisions required her signature for approval as long as she was employed and her systems were still operational. Check and check. She didn't fly into a rage. She didn't anxiously pace. She simply took out her phone, launched the scanner application, and began her work. Scan, save, encrypt. 1 copy to her private email, another to her employment lawyer who had helped draft the clause, and a third to Sylvana Pinnell, a board member since the 7th year, who had once told Leonora over sea bass, "If the old guard ever makes a move on you, send me the proof, and I'll bring the daggers." By the time the attachments were in her sent folder, Leonora was already outlining a summary of all current systems running on the Aris Roding algorithm, her original codebase. It was definitely still in use. She was certain of that without even checking. They had only rebranded it Ham Ops a year ago, as if that could scrub her name from the code. She closed the cabinet, re-secured the lock, and retrieved the syrup from the table, pouring herself a small glass. She didn't make a toast. She made a calculation. The next day wouldn't be about showing Jeremy he was wrong. It would be about forcing the entire board to recall why she was never someone you could simply optimize. Gideon Ham came back to the office on a bleak Tuesday with a recently stitched abdomen, a very short temper, and the dawning horror that entrusting his son with the company for a single week was like giving a toddler a power tool and expecting fine art. His assistant, Beatrice, a formidable and stone-faced 65-year-old, greeted him by the elevator with a sheaf of documents and a sticky note that read, "You'll want coffee first." The instant he walked into his office, he saw it. Leonora's scanned contract, printed in triplicate, meticulously clipped and positioned squarely on his mahogany desk like a legal landmine. His stomach dropped before he even looked at the title. Clause 12C was highlighted in red. A brief, fleeting hope surfaced. Perhaps it was a simple error. Perhaps she was just creating a fuss, seeking a better severance package on her way out. But then he spotted the signature at the bottom, his own signature, notarized. The date corresponded with the week after their main distribution hub had crashed. Leonora had single-handedly pulled the entire company from the brink with a system she created on a laptop that was older than Jeremy's most recent romantic interest. He slumped into his chair, his stomach churning again, but this time it wasn't due to the surgery. "Beatrice," he called out. She appeared at the door, having already sent him a text. "He's on his way." Gideon didn't offer thanks. He just kneaded his temples and stared at the clause once more, reading it as if it were a death warrant he had authored himself. And perhaps it was. A knock. Jeremy entered with a flourish, radiating swagger and playlist-fueled confidence. "Welcome back, Dad. Good to see you made it." Gideon didn't raise his head. "Did you dismiss Leonora Aris?" "Yeah. No worries. It was all by the book. HR approved it. Her role was outdated, and honestly, she was just slowing things down." Jeremy settled into a visitor's chair, his leg jittering. "You were always telling us to trim the fat." Well, I trimmed. Gideon slowly looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Did you review her contract before you did that?" Jeremy shrugged. "Why would I? It's 100 pages of outdated legal jargon." "She's bluffing. I mean, she sent some old PDF to the board, probably trying to get a payout. Classic bitter ex-employee tactic." Gideon pushed the papers across the desk. Jeremy took them as if he were being handed a restaurant menu. Clause 12. Paragraph C, Gideon stated, his voice as dry as desert sand. She possesses veto authority over organizational restructuring, including terminations. And if her software is still in use, which it is, firing her without board oversight is a breach of contract. Jeremy blinked. Wait, seriously? That's not possible. That's ridiculous. Why would you ever agree to that? Because 15 years ago, this company was drowning, and Leonora built a logistics system that saved it from going under. Gideon retorted. That clause is legitimate. So is the equity, and so is the IP. If she pursues this, she doesn't just reclaim her position. She gets a piece of your position, too. Jeremy's face went white. But I've already processed her termination. Her severance is in the system. Then you should hope to God she doesn't accept it. For the very first time since Jeremy had waltzed into the job, as if it were a prize in a cereal box, Gideon witnessed a crack in his facade, that nervous twitch behind the eyes, the sound of gears grinding, slow, rusted, and full of dread. Gideon leaned back, letting out a sharp breath. Leonora doesn't make threats, unless she's already taken action. If she's reached out to Silvana Pinnell. He left the sentence hanging. They both knew Silvana did not mess around. The silence that ensued was suffocating. Jeremy stood, his hands repeatedly clenching and unclenching, as the gravity of the situation finally seeped through his designer-labeled defenses. Gideon tapped the contract. You didn't fire an employee, Jeremy. You provoked a war with the one general you couldn't afford to fight. It began with minor issues, the type of glitches no one pays attention to until they pile up like unwashed plates in a dorm room. On Wednesday, a freight shipment to Port Kestrel went missing. The client called 3 times, incandescent with rage by the third call. On Thursday, a pair of invoices disappeared from the system, simply vanishing as if they had never been created. On Friday, the Western Hub sent a shipment of automotive batteries to Montclair instead of Viridia, costing the company $6,000 in expedited corrections and a groveling apology email. Each issue, by itself, was a small fire, but taken together, they were precisely the kind of small wounds Leonora had spent 15 years expertly patching up before anyone even noticed. Now, the bleeding was uncontrolled. In the meantime, the office was filled with the anxious hum that precedes a major storm, when no one is sure who is safe. Leonora's name wasn't mentioned in public, but her presence was felt everywhere, in the employee lounge, in chat channels camouflaged as jokes, in hushed tones over microwaved dinners, and on passive-aggressive sticky notes. Did you hear about the clause? Someone whispered near the copier. She owns the IP rights or something, right? That's a huge deal. I heard she CC'd the board before she even got to her car. Wait, Jeremy fired her? That little tyrant? My friend in legal said it might be a breach of contract. A serious breach. Silvana Pinnell didn't engage in office chatter. She didn't need to. The simple fact that she hadn't made a public statement supporting Jeremy spoke volumes. Everyone noticed. They always noticed when Silvana became quiet, like the eerie calm in the woods, just before a predator strikes. And then came the final straw. It was Leo, a junior developer recently promoted to systems analyst. Quiet, more intelligent than he appeared, and deeply averse to conflict. He had been assigned to review internal code dependencies ahead of their next warehouse software deployment. 2 hours into his audit, he discovered it. A line of code buried within their automated load-balancing script, Picasso adapted from original ARO, Eris routing algorithm. Copyright, Eris. He stared at it for a full minute, then checked the development logs. She hadn't just created the initial framework. Her algorithms were the framework. Repackaged and renamed, certainly, but it was the core structure, the very DNA of the system orchestrating their entire logistics chain, was all hers. Leo did what any savvy junior employee does in a corporate thriller. He methodically took screenshots of everything. compressed them into a folder named Contingency, and placed a printout on his manager's desk, with a note that read, "Think we might owe Leonora royalties." That sticky note had traveled 3 desks by lunchtime. HR received it by 3 p.m., and the legal department had it by 5. By Monday morning, Gideon's inbox contained 15 separate email threads, with the subject line, "Urgent, Heiress IP rights." Leonora hadn't said a thing, hadn't sent a single tweet, hadn't made any cryptic "when one door closes" posts on her professional network. She didn't need to. Her absence had become a powerful presence, like a missing support beam in a house you believed was structurally sound, until the ceiling started to bow. No outbursts, no ultimatums, just silent, unfolding chaos. And somewhere amidst all those flickering computer screens and stressed-out middle managers, hoping Jeremy wouldn't schedule another all-hands meeting, one truth crystallized into something colder than fact. Leonora Iris wasn't just a terminated employee. She was now a fully loaded weapon that the company had placed on the boardroom table and was too afraid to touch. Subject line, Notice of Contractual Breach, Clause 12C and IP Ownership Review, sent at 6:02 a.m., just as the office lights were beginning to hum to life, while most of the C-suite were still groggy from sleep. Leonora's timing was always impeccable. The email was concise, 5 paragraphs, no filler, no emotional language, no heated ultimatums, just cold precision. Dear board members, on the date of my termination, I was notified, without any prior board consultation or consent, that my position had been eliminated, as stipulated in my employment agreement, Clause 12C. Such restructuring decisions are subject to approval due to the ongoing use of the Heiress routing algorithm, ARA, architecture, and its associated intellectual property. This termination was executed while these systems were still fundamental to core operations, and without the required formal consent. For your convenience, I have appended documentation verifying my IP contributions, active code fragments currently in live deployment, and a signed copy of the original agreement. While I am hopeful this was merely an administrative error, the legal ramifications of this breach and potential royalty arrears require immediate clarification. I am available to discuss a resolution. Attachments: Ham Original, Contract, PDF, ARA, IP, Summary.pdf, Freight Ops, Code, Sample, Enel, Heiress.docx. She didn't include anyone from HR. She didn't include anyone from Jeremy's team. Only the board. Then she rose from her kitchen table, poured the last of the Syrah, and began preparing her avocado toast as if it were any other morning. Because for Leonora, it was. This was business as usual. This was the inevitable result when someone mistakes quiet resolve for acquiescence. By 8 a.m., the responses started to arrive. The first was from Katarina Beck, the compliance officer and a notorious stickler. 4 words: "When are you free?" The second, from Silvana Pennell: "We need to speak. Soon." At 8:37 a.m., she was blind copied on an internal thread with the subject, "Urgent Review, Termination Protocols and Royalty Risk." Leonora did not reply. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what would unfold next. She was counting on it. At 9:10 a.m., a controlled panic rippled through the executive floor. Boardroom doors were shut ahead of schedule. Calendars were wiped clean. Someone even canceled Jeremy's 10 a.m. Vision for the Future webinar. Without informing him, Gideon Ham entered with a manila folder and an expression that screamed, "I am about to pay for my own blunders." Legal had already begun retrieving documents, scrutinizing every signature Jeremy had made since Leonora's departure, non-disclosure agreement updates, vendor contract renewals. Legal had already begun retrieving documents, scrutinizing every signature Jeremy had made since Leonora's departure, NDA updates, vendor renewals, a new agreement with a supply chain analytics company whose software was built upon a system still running Leonora's code, and that's when they discovered it. Not only had Leonora been terminated without the board's consent, but Jeremy had also approved a system upgrade that surreptitiously replicated her original framework without any compensation or credit. The phrase willful infringement began to circulate through private messages, followed by malicious restructuring. One lawyer even noted, "She isn't just entitled to back pay, she may be entitled to retroactive equity adjustments." Outside the glass-walled offices, Jeremy posed for a social media intern's photo, smiling about the company's culture of innovation. Inside, a different kind of innovation was taking place, an impromptu audit, a cascade of legal memos, and the first hushed mentions of board-level discontent that no public relations spin could conceal. Leonora still hadn't responded, because true power doesn't need to knock. It simply lets itself in when you're least prepared, cloaked in silence, and carrying receipts sharp enough to sever careers. Jeremy learned about the private board meeting the same way he learned about most critical information these days, by being the last one in the building, a building his father still technically owned, to find out. He had sauntered into the executive lounge mid-morning, a specialty latte in one hand, and his phone in the other, scrolling through online influencers as if they were dispensing wisdom. That's when he noticed Silvana Pennell entering conference room B, followed by Gideon, Katarina, and the entire legal team. He hadn't received an invitation. No one had given him a heads up, not even a "just looping you in" from Beatrice, who typically treated him with deference. This time, she walked straight past him, carrying a folder labeled RSIP, Clause 12. Something inside Jeremy's chest tightened, a spark of an unfamiliar feeling, just below his usual layer of arrogance. It felt cold, damp, and shaped like panic. He strode back to his office, shutting the door with more force than intended, and dialed Leonora's number. Ring, ring, voicemail. He redialed. It went directly to voicemail. He left a message this time. "Hey, Leonora. Look, I feel like we might have started off on the wrong note. I just wanted to chat. Maybe we can resolve this privately. Give me a call back, okay?" Even he could hear the insincerity. His voice wavered on the word privately. 15 minutes later, a response came, not from Leonora, but from her old automatic reply, still active on her personal email. "Thank you for your message. I am not available at the moment. If your matter is urgent, please direct it to someone who didn't just label me redundant." Ethan threw his phone down, knocking over a glass paperweight that shattered into sharp, jagged pieces, each one a small reminder that he was not, in fact, in charge. Then came the final blow. He marched down to the DevOps department, huffing like an agitated bull, and demanded that Leo, the junior analyst who had found the code tags, show me the damn system logs. Leo, in the middle of a diet soda and visibly unnerved, opened a terminal and displayed the LiveOps script. Jeremy stared at endless lines of code, not truly grasping what he was looking at, until Leo highlighted a specific tag, CHA copyright L, ARIS, ARA Core Logic, v2.4. Do not modify without legal clearance. And right below it, use of this software without a licensing agreement constitutes a breach of IP ownership terms. It was embedded, not just a single tag, but hundreds. Watermarked metadata, nested comments, version histories, all of it traceable. Leonora hadn't merely built the system, she had branded it like livestock, subtly, legally, and permanently. What if we just, rewrote the code? Jeremy asked, his lip twitching. Reformat the whole thing, remove her tags, a quick fix. Leo froze, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Sir, that would be fraud. Who's talking about fraud? I'm talking about modernizing, okay? Being creative. There could be a bonus in it for you. Jeremy dangled the word like a cheap movie prop. Leo's silence was more damning than any formal complaint. By 4 p.m., Leo had sent an email to HR with a copy to legal, attaching a transcript of Jeremy's modernization proposal with a single, simple line at the top. This conversation made me uncomfortable. Please advise. It didn't take long for that email to land in Silvana's inbox, then Gideon's, and then to be discussed in the board session Jeremy still hadn't been invited to. By 5:15 p.m., Jeremy's keycard access had been quietly restricted, not cancelled, just adjusted. He hadn't noticed yet, but he would, because desperation carries the stench of fear, and when fear begins to fester, it attracts a certain kind of attention, the kind that topples dynasties. Gideon didn't call first. He stood on Leonora's porch for longer than any respectable CEO should, clutching a manila folder, as if it were a ransom payment. He wasn't wearing the sharp suit he used for battling investors, but rather slacks and a simple jacket, dressed like a man who understood this was no longer about business. It was about damage control. Leonora opened the door deliberately. No smile, no greeting, just the precise, calm stillness she wore like a suit of armor. 5 minutes, Gideon said. Then I'll leave. She admitted him without saying a word. The house was just as he recalled. Minimalist design, neutral colors, nothing ostentatious, except for the dining table, which was covered with neatly arranged legal documents, industry reports, a framed photo of her with her beagles on a shoreline, and a yellow legal pad filled with handwritten points that looked less like notes and more like a campaign strategy. She didn't offer him a drink. He didn't request one. I made a mistake, Gideon began. His gaze lowered. I never should have allowed him in that position. I thought giving him a taste of responsibility would ground him, humble him. I didn't imagine he'd gut the company, Leonora finished, her voice even. Destroy the one individual who had saved it from ruin a dozen times over, he added. Yes, that too. Silence. Leonora remained still, not even sighing, just reaching down to slide a folder across the table toward him. Reinstatement offer, she stated. Effective immediately. 6 months of back pay. A retroactive equity adjustment to match the performance targets achieved with my IP, and a 2-year licensing agreement for all existing and future derivative systems. On my conditions. Gideon didn't open it. He just looked at it as if it were a loaded weapon. If you refuse to sign, Leonora went on, I will be in Ethelred Holledge's office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I've already met with their CTO. He is well aware of what I've built, what I still own, and he is extremely keen on acquiring the licensing rights, particularly now that we are both aware of your board's legal vulnerability. You would let it all burn? Gideon asked, his voice soft, almost a plea. She cocked her head slightly. No, I would simply demand what it's worth. It dawned on him then. She wasn't motivated by vengeance. She was driven by a need for equilibrium, for principle, for acknowledgement, and she had constructed her case step by step, with the same meticulous care she had used to rebuild his freight network during the U-8 crisis. You don't want the job back? He asked, tentatively. No, she replied, not in its previous form, but I will accept something superior, something more defined. He nodded, his hands shaking almost imperceptibly as he reached for a pen. I'll deal with Jeremy, Gideon said, more to himself than to her. He's my son, after all. At this, Leonora held up a hand, calmly, icily. No, let him face the board first. She leaned back, her face a mask. Let him discover what it's like to be deemed non-essential by the people who actually bother to read the contracts. Gideon looked up, his eyes weary. You always told me you didn't believe in revenge, he said. Leonora smiled, for the first time. I don't, she said. I believe in consequences. Jeremy entered the boardroom with the swagger of someone about to give a keynote speech he hadn't prepared for, but was sure he could improvise. He had on his signature smirk, and a blazer so fitted it screamed visionary, his eyes scanning the faces around the table, searching for an encouraging look. He found none. The room was silent, not hostile, not even tense, just still, like the moment between a flash of lightning and the clap of thunder. And then he saw her. Leonora was seated at the other end of the table, composed and steady, a closed folder before her, her hands clasped like a witness in a trial who already knows the outcome. She didn't acknowledge him, didn't even blink. Jeremy's smirk wavered. He tugged at his collar and cleared his throat. "Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to share some recent developments." "No need," Silvana interjected, not looking up from the folder on her lap. "We've already had a very illuminating morning." Jeremy blinked. "I'm sorry?" Katerina, sitting next to her, held up a sheet of paper. She read aloud, Clause 12C, no organizational or leadership changes, including termination or reassignment, shall be implemented without the written consent of Ms. Aris, provided company operations are utilizing intellectual property developed or designed by her during her active employment. She paused. "Which they were, and which they are." Next, the board's legal counsel spoke. "As per our review, over 70% of the current freight system's operations are based on proprietary code structures derived from the ARIS protocol. Any attempt to modify this code would take 6 months and require complete relicensing." Leonora remained silent. Gideon sat at the head of the table, looking straight ahead, hands folded, not offering defense or condemnation, merely observing. Jeremy managed a dry, unconvincing laugh. "Okay, but let's be realistic. We're all on the same side here. Leonora, you could have just come to me. There was no need to involve the entire board." Leonora finally made a move. Slowly, deliberately, she opened her folder and slid a flash drive across the polished surface of the table. "Play it," she said. Her voice was soft, but cut like glass. Katerina inserted the drive. The large screen behind them came to life. The footage showed a sleek, high-speed demonstration of the company's freight automation system, real-time route optimization, load balancing forecasts, predictive delay alerts. Every single feature operated with the quiet efficiency of a high-end electric vehicle. In the bottom right corner, subtle but unmistakable, was the watermark, powered by L. Aris IP Holdings. A long, heavy silence descended, the kind of silence where careers go to die. Then the CFO spoke. "3 of our vendors have already contacted us. One is considering legal action for failure to disclose IP ownership in our system agreements. If we don't contain this, we are facing breach of contract lawsuits, royalty payments, and a massive license renegotiation." Jeremy's jaw tightened. "So what? You're taking her side over mine?" "No," Silvana said flatly. "We are siding with the company over its liabilities." Then she addressed Leonora. "Ms. Aris, have your conditions changed?" Leonora gave a single nod. "Only in their delivery timeline." Gideon cleared his throat. "We have reviewed and approved her reinstatement, subject to the board's formal agreement. Effective immediately, she will return under the new title of Executive Director of Systems Integrity, with independent oversight privileges." The motion passed unanimously, but Leonora did not reach for the contract. Instead, she stood and smoothed her blazer. "I'm grateful for the offer," she said, "but I will not be returning." A murmur of shock went through the room. She met Gideon's gaze. "I've already accepted another offer. Ethelred Haulage. They presented me with terms I couldn't possibly turn down. Full autonomy over licensing. And no Ham family members involved." Jeremy's mouth fell open. Leonora silenced him with a look that was more potent than any shout. She then collected her folder, walked to the door, and paused. "For whoever takes my place," she said, without turning around, "I'd recommend starting by changing the system passwords. I have no confidence in what might still be in his inbox." And with that, she departed, calm, victorious, and beyond their reach. Jeremy collapsed into a chair, the sweat soaking through his designer collar, as the board members began to quietly discuss options for interim leadership. No one asked for his input. They never would again.